Daniel Whitfield had buried a wife, survived 2 rounds of chemotherapy, and once talked a man down from jumping off the Ashgrove Bridge, but nothing in 61 years had prepared him for the sentence his daughter-in-law said to him over a plate of untouched pot roast. "Buy us a house, Daniel, or you can forget you ever have grandchildren." She said it the way another person might ask him to pass the salt. Calm, pleasant, even, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of her mouth as if she'd rehearsed the line in a mirror and liked how it looked on her. Daniel set down his fork very carefully because his hands had started to shake and he did not want her to see that. "Say that again, Vanessa," he said. "I want to make sure I heard you right." "You heard me?" She reached over and refilled her wine glass without asking anyone if they wanted more. "Ryan and I have decided, either you help us buy the house on Larkspur, the 4-bedroom, the one with the pool, or we stop bringing Sophie and Miles around. It's not complicated." Across the table, his son Ryan stared very hard at his own plate. 34 years old, an accountant, a grown man, and he could not lift his eyes to meet his father's. "Ryan," Daniel said, did you agree to this?" A long pause. "Dad, it's not a threat, it's just Vanessa's right that with the market the way it is and with 2 kids and my student loans still." "It's a threat," Daniel said quietly. "She just told me it was one." Vanessa laughed, a light tinkling sound that did not reach her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, I'm just being honest about consequences. You have the money, Daniel, everybody knows you have the money. Rose left you that whole life insurance payout plus your pension plus the house is paid off. And you want to sit on it while your own grandchildren grow up not knowing their grandfather. That's your choice to make." Daniel looked at his son's downturned head, at the woman who had married him 18 months ago in a ceremony that had cost more than Daniel's first car, and felt something in his chest go very still and very cold. "I need some air," he said, and walked out of his son's dining room into the June evening, where the crickets were starting up and none of it made a bit of sense. Daniel had liked Vanessa Cole well enough in the beginning. She was polished, quick with a compliment. She remembered his late wife's name, Rose, and asked about her sometimes, which Daniel had taken, foolishly it turned out, as a sign of genuine warmth rather than a piece of social choreography. She told them early on a story about herself that Daniel had never had reason to doubt. Grew up in Millbrook, a nice suburb 2 hours north. Father an engineer, mother a schoolteacher, both retired now and living in Florida, too far and too frail to travel much, which was why Daniel had never met them, not once, not even at the wedding, where they'd sent a card and a generous check instead of showing up. Vanessa had explained it with a small, practiced sadness, her father's hip, her mother's anxiety about flying, and Daniel, who had lost his own parents young, had simply nodded and let it be. She worked as a financial consultant, something involving client portfolios that Daniel had never fully understood and had never pressed her on, because when he asked follow-up questions she had a way of making him feel slow for asking them. She was, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of woman a father hopes his son will marry, attractive, articulate, ambitious. It was only in the last 6 months, since the wedding money had run its course and the credit card statements Daniel suspected had started arriving with numbers that made Ryan's voice go tight on the phone, that something underneath the polish had begun to show through the cracks. Little comments about Daniel's house. Little questions about what exactly he intended to do with Rose's insurance money, now that he was just rattling around in that place alone. He should have seen it building, he hadn't wanted to. That night, after he left his son's house, Daniel drove home in silence, made himself a cup of tea he didn't drink, and sat at his kitchen table with his late wife's photograph propped against the sugar bowl, the way he did on the nights he needed to think something through with her. "She threatened our grandbabies, Rose," he said out loud to the empty kitchen. "Told me to forget I have them, like they're a coupon she can decide whether to honor." Rose, in the photograph, just smiled the way she always smiled, patient and a little amused, the way she used to smile at him when he was working himself into a state over something he hadn't fully investigated yet. "Find out who she really is first, Danny," he could almost hear her say. "You never liked buying a used car without popping the hood. Don't buy this either." He sat with that a long moment. Then he got up, went to the small home office that used to be Rose's sewing room, and turned on the computer. Daniel was 61, not stupid, and not nearly as helpless with a computer as his son liked to imply. He'd run his own small electrical contracting business for 30 years before he sold it and retired. He'd done payroll, he'd done permits, He chased down 100 subcontractors who owed him money and didn't want to be found. Tracking down information about people was not, in the end, so different from tracking down a contractor who'd skipped town with a deposit. He started simple: Vanessa's full name, Vanessa Marie Cole, and the town she claimed to be from, Millbrook. He searched public records, old news archives, anything with her name attached. The Millbrook part checked out mostly. A Cole family had lived there, but when he dug into property records he found something odd. The house Vanessa always described in loving detail, the one with the wraparound porch and her mother's rose garden, had been sold in a foreclosure auction 14 years ago. Not a graceful retirement downsize, a foreclosure. He kept digging. It took him 4 nights, an embarrassing number of half-finished cups of coffee, and one increasingly incredulous phone call to an old friend from his contracting days who now did skip tracing work for a couple of local law firms, before the real picture started to surface. Vanessa Marie Cole had not always been Vanessa Marie Cole. She'd been born Melissa Ann Corbett. She changed her name legally cleanly through the courts 11 years ago, right around her 23rd birthday. Name changes weren't illegal, weren't even unusual. People did it after divorces, after estrangements, after all kinds of ordinary human reasons. Daniel told himself that, tried to give her the benefit of the doubt even as his stomach tightened. Then he found the court records from the year before the name change. Melissa Corbett had worked as a bookkeeper for a small family-owned landscaping company in a town 40 minutes from Millbrook. Over roughly 18 months, she had quietly diverted just over $71,000 from the company's accounts into a shell account she controlled, using falsified invoices and a doctored reconciliation process that, according to the court filing, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of financial controls consistent with intent to evade detection. The owners, an elderly couple who'd built the business from nothing over 30 years, had nearly lost it. They'd had to take out a second mortgage on their home to cover payroll while the case worked through the courts. She'd pleaded guilty to embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months of probation, restitution payments, and because she was young and had no prior record and had a good lawyer, no jail time. The case had been quietly sealed to juvenile-adjacent record-sealing statutes that Daniel didn't fully understand. But his friend explained that a sealed record wasn't the same as an erased one, and a name change on top of it made the whole thing functionally invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Daniel sat back from the computer screen and felt something in him go from cold to something closer to sick. Sophisticated understanding of financial controls, he read again out loud. Intent to evade detection. He thought about Vanessa's job now, financial consultant, vague enough that no one in the family had ever pressed for details. He thought about the 18 months since the wedding, the slow, steady creep of comments about his money, his house, his late wife's insurance payout. He thought about Ryan's tight voice on the phone lately, the credit card statements Daniel suspected but had never seen. And he thought about one more thing his friend had mentioned almost as an aside. 3 months ago, a formal inquiry had been opened by the state licensing board that oversaw financial advisors in response to a complaint filed by a former client of Vanessa's current firm. The complaint alleged unauthorized transfers out of a retirement account belonging to an elderly client. An audit was already underway. Daniel didn't know for certain what that audit would find, but he knew, the way you know a floor is about to give under your weight before it actually does, that Vanessa Cole was not asking him for a house because she and Ryan simply wanted one. She needed money, fast, quiet money, and she had decided that threatening a grieving widower's relationship with his own grandchildren was an acceptable way to get it. Daniel did not confront her right away. He thought about it, God, how he thought about it, replaying the dinner table scene over and over, the wine glass, the little smile, but Rose's voice kept coming back to him from that kitchen table conversation with a photograph. Don't swing wide when you can land it clean, Danny. So instead he called his son. I need you to come over, alone, tomorrow before work if you can manage it. Ryan showed up at 7:15 the next morning, looking like a man who hadn't slept, which told Daniel something too, that whatever guilt Ryan carried about the dinner table ultimatum, it hadn't been sitting easy with him either. Dad, look about last night. Sit down, Daniel said, not unkindly, and put 2 mugs of coffee on the table between them, along with a manila folder he'd printed the night before. I need to show you something, and I need you to look at all of it before you say anything. Ryan's hands were unsteady as he opened the folder. Daniel watched his son's face move through the stages: confusion at the unfamiliar name Melissa Corbett, disbelief at the court document, and then something that looked like the floor genuinely dropping out from under him. When he got to the page about the pending licensing board inquiry, the one Daniel's friend had managed to get a redacted summary of. This can't be, Ryan's voice cracked. There's got to be some mistake. Different Melissa Corbett, this isn't. Date of birth matches, mother's maiden name on the name change petition matches the mother Vanessa's told us about down to the maiden name Doreen. Social security number partial match my friend was able to confirm through legitimate channels. Ryan, Daniel put his hand flat on the table. I didn't want this to be true either. I checked it 4 different ways, hoping I'd be wrong. Ryan sat very still for a long moment, staring down at the papers, and then he said very quietly, the house. She's been so insistent about the house. She said it was for the kids, for stability, for she cried about it, Dad, she actually cried. When did the crying start? Ryan thought, about 3 months ago. 3 months, the same window as the licensing board inquiry. I think, Daniel said slowly, choosing every word like he was diffusing something, that your wife may be in serious financial and legal trouble that has nothing to do with buying a house and everything to do with covering something up before an audit finds it. I think the house was never really the point. I think she needed a large sum of money to move quickly and quietly, and she decided the fastest way to get it was to threaten the person most likely to hand it over without asking too many questions, a grieving man who'd do anything not to lose his grandkids. Ryan put his face in his hands. Daniel had not seen his son cry since Rose's funeral, and it broke something in him fresh to see it now for an entirely different reason. I need to see Sophie and Miles, Ryan said finally, muffled through his fingers. I need to know they're safe. If there's money missing from somewhere, if there's an investigation, Dad, is she going to jail? I don't know, Daniel said honestly. That's not up to us. What's up to us is what happens next in this family, and whether you're going to keep letting somebody use my grandchildren as leverage against me while she cleans up a mess she made before I ever knew her real name. The second dinner happened 5 days later, and this time Daniel picked the location, his own house, his own table, the one Rose had picked out at an estate sale 30 years ago because she'd loved the way the wood grain caught the light. Vanessa arrived expecting, Daniel suspected, a negotiation. A defeated old man ready to write a check to keep his grandchildren in his life. She dressed for it, sharp, confident, the same small, satisfied smile from the pot roast dinner already half formed on her face as she sat down. I'm glad you came around, Daniel, she said, reaching for the wine before anyone had even sat properly. I know it's a big ask, but you'll see once we're settled how much better things will be for everyone. The kids will have a real yard. Ryan and I have already talked to a realtor about. Melissa, Daniel said. The wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. The room went very quiet. Ryan, beside her, did not look up because he already knew what was coming. Daniel had told him everything, had asked only that he sit through this and let his father finish before either of them said another word. I'm sorry, Vanessa's voice had lost some of its polish already. Melissa Ann Corbett, Daniel said again, evenly. Born in Millbrook, not to an engineer and a schoolteacher who retired to Florida. I checked. There's no record of a Corbett or a Cole matching that description ever living in the Florida county you named. Your father worked in shipping logistics. Your mother, Doreen, still lives 40 minutes from here, in the same town where you worked as a bookkeeper for Haverson Landscaping 11 years ago, before you were convicted of embezzling just over $71,000 from a couple who nearly lost the business they'd spent 30 years building. Vanessa had gone very white. You have no right to dig into my past like some private investigator. I have every right to protect my grandchildren, Daniel said, when their mother sits at a dinner table and threatens to take them away from me unless I hand over a house. I have every right to know exactly who's making that threat and why. That was a long time ago, she said, recovering some sharpness, jaw tightening. I paid restitution. I served my probation. I changed my name legally through the courts, which is my right, and I built an entire career and a life since then, and you have no. I also know, Daniel continued quiet and level, about the licensing board inquiry that opened 3 months ago, about a client's complaint regarding unauthorized transfers out of a retirement account. That's not 11 years ago, Melissa. That's now. That's the same 3 months you've suddenly needed money fast enough to threaten your husband's father with losing his grandchildren. Ryan finally lifted his head. Vanessa, he said, and his voice was raw. Is that true? Is there really an investigation? Is that what the house was actually for? Were you going to use money from my father to cover up whatever you did to that client's account? For a long moment, nobody spoke. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, opened again, and Daniel watched something crack across her carefully arranged features. Not quite guilt, he thought, but the particular panic of someone who has just watched a story collapse in real time. You don't understand what it's like, she finally said, low and fast, no longer performing for anyone. I was 22, I had nothing. I watched my mother work herself sick for 30 years and end up with nothing to show for it. And I decided I wasn't going to live like that, and I made one bad decision young. And I've spent 11 years rebuilding from it brick by brick, and now I have a client, an old man made a complaint. And it's a misunderstanding, it's a paperwork error, but the board doesn't care about intent. They care about numbers on a page, and if I can't show liquidity. If I can't show I have assets, it makes me look. It makes you look like exactly what you are, Daniel said, not cruelly but without softness either. Someone who takes what isn't hers when she's desperate enough and dresses it up as something else afterward. Don't you dare, Vanessa snapped, tears coming now, real ones or performed ones. Daniel genuinely couldn't tell anymore. Stand there and judge me from your paid-off house and your dead wife's insurance money like you understand anything about starting with nothing. I buried my wife of 31 years, Daniel said, and his own voice finally shook, the first crack in his composure all night. I built a business from nothing with my own two hands, and I never once, not one single time, threatened to take somebody's grandchildren away from them to get what I wanted. That's not desperation, Melissa. That's cruelty. There's a difference, and you crossed it the moment you smiled at me over that pot roast. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. She looked at Ryan, waiting, Daniel thought, for her husband to rise and defend her the way he apparently always had. Ryan stayed seated. I need to think, Ryan said quietly, not looking at her. I need to think about a lot of things, starting with why my wife lied to me about her entire life and ending with whatever's actually going on with that inquiry, because if there's money missing from a client account, Vanessa, that's not something my father's house is going to fix. That's something a lawyer is going to have to fix, and you should have told me the truth about all of it a long time before it got anywhere near my father and my kids. She left without another word, the front door shutting hard enough to rattle the windows Rose had once picked the curtains for. It did not end cleanly the way these things rarely do. There was a separation within 2 months, a formal one with lawyers, and Daniel learned later through Ryan in a low, tired voice on the phone that the licensing board inquiry had in fact found what it was looking for. There would be restitution. There might this time be more than probation. Daniel never got any satisfaction out of that part. He'd wanted badly to be wrong about all of it, wanted Vanessa to be exactly the woman she'd first appeared to be at that wedding, warm and quick with a compliment, someone who remembered his late wife's name because she meant it. But he got his grandchildren, that was the part that mattered. Sophie, 6, and Miles, 3, came to his house most Sundays now, and Ryan came with them, quieter than he used to be, still working through a betrayal Daniel understood better than he wished he did. On one of those Sundays, sitting on the back porch while Sophie chased fireflies across the lawn Rose used to keep so carefully, Ryan turned to his father and said, "How'd you know to even start looking? I mean, really, what made you not just write the check?" Daniel thought about the kitchen table, the photograph propped against the sugar bowl, the voice he could still hear so clearly some nights that it didn't feel like memory at all. "Your mother taught me a long time ago," he said, "never to buy something or believe someone without popping the hood first. I should have listened to that instinct the day I met her. I'm glad I finally did before it cost me you too." Sophie shrieked with laughter somewhere in the dark, a jar of fireflies glowing gold in her small hands, and Daniel Whitfield sat on his porch with his son beside him and felt, for the first time in months, something in his chest finally settle.